Hola, I'm Claudia Romo Edelman.
And I'm Cynthia Kleinbaum-Milner.
And this is a podcast a la Latina.
The playbook to succeed being your authentic self.
Today, an incredible guest, Dr. Ana Cepin.
Dr. Cepin is an associate professor of OBGYN at the Columbia University Medical Center.
And here are the 3 key takeaways.
Number 1, she teaches us the power of belonging to an affinity group as a way to navigate new and homogeneous environments where you may feel like you don't belong.
Number 2, not having the financial means should never stop you from chasing your big dreams.
And number 3, she talks to us about how important it is to have role models early in your life. In her case, becoming a doctor was inspired by her own Dominican pediatrician.
All of that and more here, a la Latina. Cynthia, tell me more about Money Lion. What is your favorite product?
The product that I loved the most first was our credit builder loan. When I moved to the US, I realized that a good credit score impacts so many aspects of our life. If you have a high credit score, you can get lower interest rates on loans and credit cards, better insurance rates, and better chances of getting a loan. Can you imagine that more than half of our members raise their credit score by up to 27 points in 60 days?
Wow, okay, so I'm learning something new here, and I should be checking on my credit score myself.
Everybody should, and it's super easy. So for anyone out there needing to improve their credit score or even know your credit score, come to Money Lion.
That's amazing. How do you access the credit builder loan?
2 ways. Either go to moneylion.com/membership or download the Money Lion app.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm
Let's do
in.
it.
Today, an incredible guest, Dr. Ana Cepin.
Dr. Cepin is an associate professor of obstetrics and gynecology at Columbia University Irving Medical Center.
She's also the director of Community Women's Health and the co-director of the OBGYN Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Lastly, she's co-president of the Latino Association at Columbia University Medical School.
Ana, Dr. Cepin, what a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really happy to be here today.
I think the audience is going to have a very different experience in this episode because one doesn't think of a medical career as a corporate career immediately, right? But you have a career that spans both the medical field and more the administrative field. So I'm excited for our audience to know what's the path of somebody that studies medicine, that works in a large organization that can also have leadership roles. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
So let's start with the very beginning. We want to know what made you be who you are and what you do today. Give us a little bit more about your background.
So I actually like to start the story by saying that I was born in the very hospital where I now work. I was born to a Dominican mother who's an amazing woman. She came here from the Dominican Republic, never learned English. She worked in a factory to support us, and she also sold clothes out of our 1-bedroom apartment to help get a little bit more money to support us. She raised me as a single mother, but she really wanted me to be successful. She knew that education was incredibly important, and so that was always a very important goal for me to be able to attain an education and eventually become a professional. She also instilled in me a very strong work ethic. And so certainly by seeing how hard she worked to provide for us really inspired me to be a hard worker all throughout my education and later on. I always knew that I wanted to be a doctor. Again, in terms of role models, my pediatrician was a Dominican woman in Washington Heights. And I thought what she did was interesting, and I wanted to...
So as a kid, you were like, wow, look at my doctor.
Yeah, she looked like us. She was in the community. She spoke Spanish just like us. And, I wanted to be just like her. And there was no reason for me to question whether or not I could become like her.
Amazing.
And so I wanted to be a doctor. I've also been a gynecologist my entire life. So I was the one who in the schoolyard was telling all my friends about their periods, giving them sex ed, right outside the nun's house. So that was always something that was really interesting to me. Then a story that I think is interesting is that my mother, being the person that she is, felt that it would be really important for me and my friends to get sex ed, since we were at a Catholic school. And so she had us meet with a health educator to, give us the proper information. I stayed in touch with this person later on in life when I was a teenager looking for a summer job. She helped me get a job at the family planning clinic at New York Presbyterian as a teenager. And then eventually I became the medical director of that clinic. Wow. And so, there have been all these steps along the way that have led me to become the type of doctor that I am today. And, I think that what was really important as well was the type of educational opportunities that I had. So like I said, my mother was very committed to me getting a good education. So she put me in a Catholic school, which, was expensive for someone with her salary.
And she was doing everything possible so that she could get the money to pay for a private education because she valued education so much.
Yes. I could have gone to the public school down the street, but she really wanted me to get the best educational opportunities. And, now you can certainly find great public schools, but back then it was really hard. And so, the public schools in our communities were just really not great places. And so she really wanted me to get the best that I could get, given our circumstances. However, because of my mother, I got kicked out of Catholic school.
Why because of your mother?
She's been an activist her entire life. She started out in the Dominican Republic where she risked her life protesting Trujillo. Uh-huh. She came here and she's continued to be an activist. She always felt that it was important to try to make the lives of the people around her better. And so she is at every protest. She's signing up for every community event. And she felt that the priests weren't doing enough for the community. And so she and some parents started picketing in front of the rectory. All the kids got kicked out of Catholic school. And so I had no place to go. Oh. Because of my mother's network and relationships, she connected me to someone who helped orient us to private school. And so she helped to mentor me, helped me apply, and I ended up going to a prestigious private school with full financial aid.
Which was?
Fieldston in Riverdale.
Yeah. Which is where
that's where my kids currently go to school. Yes.
Wow,
it's an amazing school for those that don't live in New York. It's like, it's an amazing school that has outdoor space. It's a big deal, a big institution.
Yeah,
Great.
It's a beautiful school. Yeah. I paid $0 to go there because, I was so poor that, we couldn't afford anything.
But so you said you had a mentor, or your mom mentored you to go there?
My mother connected me with someone who, how these things work. Like, she was the wife of someone who was the principal at one of the schools, and so they helped me apply. I got in and then was able to go.
Was it this person was Latina or no?
No. Yeah.
Allies.
So allies, for sure. Allies are so important. And so from there, I ended up going to Harvard for college. I did not love being outside of New York. So I really wanted to come back to New York City for medical school, and certainly wanted to come back to my community. So then went to Columbia for medical school.
Yeah, but hold on. That's a little bit too fast for this incredible story.
But before we continue, can we just recognize today we're shooting it on Mother's Day, and your mom, she did get you kicked out of school.
Yes.
But that ended up being for your benefit, right? Because you ended up going to a better school. But Anna's mom, you're a rock star. Congratulations.
Yes.
Yes, and to all mothers that we have heard from all our guests have a rooted connection with their moms.
Yeah.
100% that believe that education is the key. Now, I think that before we go too far, I never shared with you, but I was also in a Catholic school that my mother and my grandmother used to go. And I was also kicked out of my school. Exactly. Which led me to the bigger opportunities in life. My father said, you're kicked out, you misbehaved because you kicked a nun. Now I'm gonna send you to the middle of nowhere. And he sent me to Atchison, Kansas for a year, where I learned English I had no words in English. I didn't know a word of English. And I learned English by literally being just like plunked in the middle of the year.
Wow.
That basically opened my appetite to going and discover the world. I was like, if there is Kansas, there is more.
Yeah.
So the takeaway of this conversation is get kicked out of your school.
Yes, of your Catholic school.
Okay, we're not going to give you that advice.
No.
But wait, so you, by the network of your mom, managed to get into a school. You learned that there was something like financial aid where you could access something even if you didn't have the financial means. And so having you being such a role model and such an incredible leader as a doctor should be an inspiration for everyone to know that these tools do help a lot of people. But then you just like went like, yeah, and then I went to Harvard and then like Columbia went. How did that happen from, like a single mother kid to being an opportunity in Fieldstone and then going to Harvard and now being a doctor? How did all that happen? And particularly coming with no means and no resources.
So again, back to my mother, she doesn't really believe in no. She believes in like, okay, you want to get that? Let's figure out how to get it. And so I never doubted that I could go on to a good school. I think that this is a very important message that I want to get across. For sure, hard work is very important, and that's the baseline, that you have to work really hard.
And you did work very hard.
And I worked really hard. And so like in terms of how I ended up at Harvard, I had straight A's, got, an amazing score on the SATs, all the while growing up in Washington Heights in the 80s, which was a really rough place. So like to be in that environment and still excel academically that way, it was, almost easy to get into Harvard, given that, right? So like, it's not easy, but it was easy given that background. And again, because of my limited financial means, I had great financial aid at Harvard. And now that financial aid is even better. So like, below certain income level, kids don't have to pay at all. And so things have really gotten even better. I graduated with very little debt from undergraduate, because I was given all that support. And so, I think that I get asked that a lot by kids that I mentor sometimes. Isn't medical school really expensive? How do you afford all of that? And I'm just like, there are a lot of resources for really poor people. So if you're really smart and really poor, there are a lot of resources. Finances should never be the reason to not try to achieve your academic dreams at
Sometimes
all.
people just need a role model and to be able to take away the clouds and start dreaming big.
Yeah.
And say, because there are resources out there. When you work hard and you're smart and you have.
A role model and Google. Because every time somebody asks me, or even the other day that you and I think were giving the talk at NASA, and people started asking us, where can we get access to these resources? Literally, just go to Google and type scholarships for Latino students, like any keywords that represent you, and there's all the resources are there available, and you just follow your dreams.
Yeah, and I didn't have Google, right? So like, I don't even know, but I had a scholarship from McDonald's. There's like a Latino scholarship from McDonald's. There's a Hispanic, a Latino scholarship as well. So outside of financial aid from the universities, there are a lot of scholarships as well. Local scholarships, national scholarships that can really help.
Okay, so you were able to know, because of your Fieldstone experience, that you could dream big and that you were going to be supported.
I also had great teachers who really inspired me. I loved learning, and they saw that I loved learning, and so they really supported me. I had, for example, my advisor who was my biology teacher. She was my big champion, the one who wrote me my letter of recommendation, the one who I could go to with any questions. And so that's also really important, finding an adult that can help mentor you, support you, advocate for you.
Did you have role models or teachers in medical school or even in Harvard that were Latinos or Latinas?
In college, no. In medical school, also no. There was one who she was somewhat of a mentor, but she was in a different field from the one that I was going into. So yes, there's so few of us, right? So it's really hard to find Latino mentors in the Ivy League, in the college level, in the graduate school level, unfortunately. But you back to allies, like that's, they're also allies, so that's also important.
I'm going to ask a question that typically Cynthia would ask, but so coming from a poor background, getting to Fieldstone, full of more wealthy people, how was that navigation? How was that adaptation? And what would you say to people that are getting that opportunity to get financial aid, but like it's a clash or a cultural experience? How do you get ready for that and get the others ready for that?
It was really, really hard. I think today, thinking about being Latina, it was the first time that I realized that I was Latina, right? Because everyone around me was Latina before. And so like it wasn't something novel or different. And then I get to this school where there are very few other Latinas. And so it was the first time that I realized how different I was from not just the rest of the United States, but people with privilege, people who had parents who were professionals, people who had wealth. And so it was very hard to be different. And, I had gone from being pretty popular and outgoing in my Catholic school to then being like completely unseen and made fun of. Like I was made fun of because I had a heavy accent. I was made fun of because of where I lived. I remember like I would wear a sweater that was like, not the same brand that was popular. And so that I would be made fun of. And that's really hard for a girl in middle school, which is where I started. And so emotionally, it was very, very difficult. Back to Latina mothers, my mother was like, deal with it. Like, it is what it is. You're getting a good education. But, it's not as easy as just deal with it, because I do think that a lot of that experience really impacted my confidence. And I don't know whether or not sacrificing your feeling of self-worth and sacrificing your confidence is fully worth it. That said, I do think that things are better now in that there is a recognition that this is hard. And so I do think that schools do more to try to be more inclusive. And I also have always believed in the power of affinity groups. So finding commonalities with others. And so, I was a part of the minority student organization at Fieldstone. When I went to Harvard, I helped found the Dominican Association. When I went to medical school, I was in the Black and Latino organization. And so I think finding community, finding people that have maybe not the exact same experience, but like similar experiences is important, because that helps you heal emotionally.
Yeah, and I am finding a lot of commonality when I was just sharing with Cynthia that my mother stopped being an economist and decided to go into acting when she was 45, and I was like in primary school. And I was kicked out of my Catholic school. I went to the US and came back to the school of my dreams. And my mother was all of a sudden poor, because she was like risking and she didn't have salaries and she was like in shows and so on, but she didn't have that. And so I was like with my father, who was very wealthy, and my mother, who was very poor, and she had like an ugly car and an ugly neighborhood and an ugly that. And I was in a school that was very wealthy. And for me, people made fun of me where I lived. I never wanted to take kids to my place and study or anything like that. I asked my mom to pick me up 2 blocks away so that I wouldn't be laughed at. But they were like, ha, 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 that car is yours. And I think that in retrospect, having a playbook, giving us to the next gen, because there's a lot of Latinos that are still going to be benefiting from that financial aid. So how do we do it? I would have liked to know on that time that there's a bigger cost, that, like in a way, finding your group of people that are also suffering from not being, like on the same level of privilege, that being also clear on the longer run, like you're gonna get bruises here, but this is worth, because it's gonna go, like you just go without knowing.
Yeah.
I just don't know that we have a manual of navigating, getting into a completely different social level. And economic level, which is what we're doing at Latinos all the time.
All the time.
And so it is really important to be able to unleash these pieces and say like, okay, if you're a mother and your kid is going to get into an opportunity, prepare her, have the talk.
Yes.
What else?
Yeah, like, don't be like my mother who was like, I don't understand what the problem is. You're getting this great education at a great school. Like, understand that your emotional and mental well-being is also really important. And so even talking about it, even like acknowledging it and saying what you said, like, yes, this is temporarily bad, but things are going to be better and you will find your people and you will eventually benefit from having gone through this. But, to a 13-year-old girl or, that's really hard to understand. And so, like, I'm not sure what the right answer is. But yes, it's important to acknowledge it and it's important to try to address it the best way we can.
I feel like there was a time when there was this cartoon of like the nerd kid in school and the popular kid in school. And it was something along the lines of like, this popular kid is going to end up working for the nerd one. Like it's going to be Bill Gates and then whoever. Yeah. And I feel like we have to have the same because I imagine that some of those people that made fun of your sweater would love to get an appointment with you now that you're so important.
Exactly. And that's a great image, right? Yeah. Like you will be in a position where these will pass.
Yeah.
These will pass. Just like close your eyes, try to like buffer yourself as much as you can, try to be as accompanied in the process that you can, but this will pass.
Yeah.
And you'll also benefit because it really does teach you grit and resilience.
Right.
If you can make it through all of that, you can handle a lot of things. And so it certainly is also a life skill that you get from navigating all these spaces. And
we heard from another guest that getting into Harvard after, like that, like shock in a way of a high school, like privileged high school with no means was easier in a way of like there were more people that were like her. And probably that was, like that is not like, how was your experience?
I mean, absolutely. I got to Harvard and it was amazing. I had all these friends, people who were like me who'd gone through the same experience. And it was amazing. I liked it a little too much. I think I probably socialized a little too much in college, more than, I should have been in the library more than I was socializing. But it was just like so amazing to finally find my people and not have to, explain myself and like, and it wasn't just that like all my friends were Dominicans from New York, at all. It was just like people had similar experiences in their spaces. And it was just that like that similar experience helped bring us together.
Now, after Harvard, you decided you wanted to be a doctor. Why?
Well, I think a lot of us go into whatever field we end up going to, not really knowing what the day-to-day is going to look like. But I wanted to be a doctor. And, despite my a little too much socializing in college, I was able to get in to medical school and was very happy to be able to go back to my community. So I went to Columbia Medical School, which is literally 2 blocks from where my mother lives.
Did you go back to live with your mom?
Eventually. So the first 2 years I lived off campus, and then I was like, wait a minute, why am I spending extra money when my mother is right there and she can cook for me while I'm in medical school? And so I went back home for the last 2 years.
And why do you think there are like not enough Latino doctors? The numbers in the healthcare system are appalling when it comes to senior positions, when it comes to doctors. You're great at your healthcare assistant, nurse even, but not registered nurse. And then you start getting into management of healthcare or doctors, and the numbers are really less than 5%. And particularly Latinas is even lower. I mean, like I assume it's really, really hard, but how do we break that?
So that is part of what I'm trying to do with some of the spaces that I'm in. Certainly doing the community health for my department and my hospital, doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion work for my department. It is really important for us to have a diverse healthcare workforce. We know that, for example, Latinos have better outcomes if they have healthcare providers who speak the same language or have a similar background. We also know that Latinos are more likely to work in spaces where there are more Latinos, like the inner city or rural areas. And so it is very important to have Latino doctors. You talked about percentages. So 19% of the United States is Latino, and that number is growing by the minute. But only 6% of the doctors are Latinos. 2% are Latinas. And we need female physicians because female physicians tend to spend a little bit more time with patients. They tend to be more patient-centered in their care. And then in an area like mine, gynecology, a lot of women are seeking female doctors. And so that number also really needs to increase.
Particularly because the Latinas are the factory of the babies of this country. We're the most common interracial marriage. We're like, go, go, baby, baby, go, go.
And then, you talked about medical schools and faculty. And academic medical faculty, only 3% are Latinos. And the academic medical system is where people are getting the highest level of care and where we're training the future generations. And so you have to have diversity there. And so that is certainly something that I'm working to try to change. What is the reason for it? I do think that it is really hard to be a doctor. There are a lot of other careers where you don't need to go to school for that long.
Which is how long?
4 years of college, 4 years of medical school. Depending on the specialty, OBGYN is 4 years of residency. And then a lot of people do a fellowship to get even more specialized. And that can be like 2 to 3 years. So you're essentially giving up a decade of your life to training to training. And yes, being a doctor is amazing. And, it's a very important work, but it is a really long road. And so if you're a teenager thinking about what I want to...
Computer science, doctor.
Yeah.
Like, where am I going to be able to, and that's the thing too, like, a lot of Latinos don't have generational wealth. So we can't afford to sit back and go to school forever. We need to get out and start making money to help support our families sometimes.
But you're saying that there's financial aid enough so that you could try to do it?
For the schooling, but you're not getting
No, you're not generating
when
income.
you're thinking about different careers, right? So like if you're thinking about an alternative career where you could start making an income earlier on, it's a sacrifice to pursue healthcare. So I think that's another reason. And then I do think that there are serious pipeline issues, right? And so like, what's the educational system like in preschool, elementary school, middle school? By the time you get to high school, it's probably too late. Like you need to have been a good student and have exposure and resources and access to
great schools.
And great schools in order to be able to get to that next level. So I think all of these things come together to make it difficult and to have the numbers that we have.
So it's long, it's expensive, it's hard, but it's worth.
It's worth it if that's your dream, for sure. And there are certainly ways to, and when I talk to people who are considering a career in medicine, like some of the things that I say is to be flexible, right? So don't just say like, I will only live in Los Angeles and work in, like you have to be flexible with medicine. You have to accept that you may go to medical school in Kansas, then you may do your residency in Iowa.
How does the residency work? I think that you have to go to a place that has that doesn't have that many doctors, or how do they assign the residency?
No, you have to apply for it. So every step of the way is super competitive. I think in the media we hear about how competitive it is to get into colleges, right? So that's the first barrier. Then medical school is super competitive. Then residencies are super competitive. You have to apply. And so you have to do things like get good grades, do research, extracurriculars, letters of recommendation for every step of the way. So, it's really hard.
And at what point, since I don't know that we're going to be able to solve the medical system here. I think it's a really hard one, but I want to know about your experience. When did you have kids? Where were you along the way, and how did you manage to be a mom and continue advancing your career?
I think that none of us are doing everything perfectly all the time, right? And so I think that that's the first thing to acknowledge, that you can't be a perfect mom and a perfect employee 100% of the time. And so at least
And a wife and a friend and a daughter and
This is a message for our husbands, for our bosses, PSA, public service announcement.
But I will say that at least what I chose to do is that when I have 2 daughters and they're 2 years apart. When I had them, I had a job that was more flexible so that it was not 9 to 5, but it was predictable hours. And then when I had my second daughter, I went part-time. So I was part-time for 2 years after the birth of my daughter. But I was very fortunate that, at that time, my husband could support us financially so that we had that flexibility. Not everyone has that flexibility to go part-time.
Yeah.
So I went part-time for 2 years and then came back full force. And so by then they were a little bit older. Their lives were more, like scheduled. And so then I could pursue my career advancement more.
Were you afraid that when you went part-time, your career was going to slow down?
Again, that's another good thing about medicine. That's not always true in other fields, but with medicine, you can kind of, shrink things down a little bit and then ramp it up. It's not, from what I've heard in other careers, it's not as simple. Like, for example, if you're on the partnership track for a law firm, you can't really stop. You have to keep going. Otherwise, you lose that momentum. But
in finance.
In finance, too. And so in medicine, that is a really great thing about medicine for women, that even though it's really hard and it takes all this work to get there, when you get there, there is flexibility for you to do different things.
Because you see a lot of women that take a step back
Yeah.
and then they want to come back and they just can't.
So before going into explaining a little bit more of what you do and your job and like how do you find your sphere, I want to ask you, a lot of our guests are saying like, let's do an MBA, encouraging people to do an MBA because it will return the investment.
Mm-hmm.
It will pay off. Does it pay off to be a doctor?
I mean, that's the question, right? Like, how does one define success? How does one define having it pay off? It's honestly not as financially lucrative as other careers, especially with insurance reimbursements, working in an academic medical center. It's not the most financially lucrative career path. There are certain areas and specialties where you can make a lot of money, but
cosmetology and doing Botox for everybody.
but things like primary care, which is so important, does not pay well at all. And so, is it worth it? Maybe not financially, but it's worth it in so many other ways. Mm-hmm. And so the finance part of it is something where it is something that we have to be honest about. Like, are you going to be have a husband, have a wife, and what is your financial situation? Do you have other ways to support the family? Because there are certain things where it's not going to be as financially lucrative. But I will say, back to my flexibility, you can go and live somewhere else, maybe not New York City, and make more money. So there is a way for you, if you're flexible, to find a way to have medicine be more of a lucrative career.
Do you regret becoming a doctor?
No, I really like what I do, and I've liked all the parts of my career that have allowed me to have that flexibility, that have allowed me to do what I like doing, but also be able to be there for my kids and things like that. So I don't regret it. I do think that things could be done better.
What would you have done differently?
I don't mean like things could be done better by me. I mean, things could be done better in the system.
Yes. What?
In the system, I do think that training doesn't have to be that long, that difficult, arduous. So I do think that there are ways to have it be more humane. I do think that something that people are realizing is how expensive medical school is. So that's another thing that could be different. And then the way that the healthcare system currently is, I feel that a lot of physicians have lost their voice in terms of being able to speak up for their patient and how healthcare is given. And so, I do think that our healthcare system does need to change.
Yeah, I think that we all agree on that. Tell us a little bit more about your role. So you're both medical, but also administrative responsibilities. Explain a bit more, and that is management, right?
Yeah, and so, when you think of a doctor, you think of a doctor seeing patients in the office, and that is the most important part, but it's only about half of what I do. The other half is administrative things and management things. And so the first thing that I did was become the medical director of the family planning practice. So it's a practice where we provide sexual and reproductive health care to women who are uninsured or underinsured. So it's a really great service that we provide to the community, and I help, as the medical director, I help manage, all the work that we do there, the way that we're providing care. And then more recently, I have taken on new roles. So now I'm Director of Community Women's Health and co-director of our department's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And this came about, unfortunately, because of 2020 and all the things that happened in 2020. We had COVID, and our neighborhood, Washington Heights, was the epicenter of the epicenter. And we already knew that there are social determinants of health that lead to poorer outcomes, but it became so stark in 2020, like you die if you have these social determinants of health. If you live in a multi-generational home, if you're an essential worker, if you don't have a primary care doctor, you will die. That became so stark, and people really felt that they needed to do something about it. And so this role came about so that we could look at ways to improve the health outcomes of the women in our community. So addressing social determinants of health, engaging with other community healthcare providers, having a better relationship with our community-based organizations. And then lastly, and actually very importantly to me, education. So I think education is power. And so this role allows me to lend my voice to teaching around different health issues. At first it was around COVID, but now I will give talks about different issues such as contraception or routine GYN care. And so, these are all the things that make up community women's health. Then in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, working towards the things that we talked about, like increasing the diversity of our workforce in our departments, making not just the numbers, but making sure that people feel like they're included and they belong. And, also still working to help improve the outcomes for our patients. Because in Washington Heights, we talked about 19% of the United States being Latino. In Washington Heights, it's 70%. And so improving health outcomes for Latinas is very, very important and urgent. And so that I do that in terms of those two areas. And so it's been really great. It's unfortunate that because of, the things that happened in 2020 between COVID and the health disparities that it unmasked, and also the racial reckoning that happened in 2020, all these things came together to allow me and those that I work with to try to have a wider impact on the patients that we care for.
And this means that you now work 150%, or you...
Or 250%.
So you added these responsibilities to your day job of being a doctor, or your role changed so you could make space for
My
leadership?
role changed so that I could have more space for these areas.
What do you think the organization sees in you that you were able to kind of advance your career and have a role that is different than the role that most people have, that you have a leadership position now?
I think this goes back to how I think about the idea of being Latina. As a Latina, it wasn't always something that I was super excited or proud about because I was in these predominantly white spaces. If our number is 2%, there aren't people that look like me, that come from my background. And so there's a little bit of imposter syndrome that comes along with it. And certainly it's a challenge and a barrier to achieving success and advancement. However, all of a sudden, being Latina from Washington Heights is amazing because given everything that's happened recently, my voice is incredibly important. I understand the community. I can explain the community. I'm a part of the community. I am a trusted messenger. And so, I always knew that my voice was important, but now it literally is because I have a very unique background and life experience that can really help my institution achieve the goals that are very important.
So you're saying that there was an enabling environment that you didn't feel before so that your voice was better heard.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you look around and what do the leaders look like? They don't look like me. And so, like, why is that? Is it because I'm not supposed to be a leader? Like, what does it take? Is that ever going to be an option? But now, like, diversity hopefully will continue to be valued. And so that was really the opportunity.
But here's where the magic taco happens. When you have an understanding of your superpower as who you are, and we would like to talk to you about your superpower, what made you grow in these 20 years and get along in your promotion in the ladder. But the other one is how do we create those enabling environments or inclusive environments or so that we can match it. So it becomes the piece where we can advance. And I think that things like our podcast and the organizations that we work with and the effort that we have create those enabling environments so that all of a sudden, what you said, like all of us, it's not all of us.
Yeah, right.
You've been working on this in decades.
And I've been Latina for a long time.
And we've been on the fight for a long time. So those enabling environments where there's every time more voices, creating those environments allow all of a sudden for a microphone to emerge so that people can hear you. But you also have to be aware of your superpowers and be using them and be like eyes wide open as what you wanted to have as a 13-year-old kid. Like, okay, this is going to take a long time, but I'm going to go for it. So what are those superpowers for you that allowed you to, as a, as a Latina that you are, as a super role model that you are, as a doctor for our community, to get to where you are?
So yes, being Latina is a superpower. And what are some of the things that come along with that? For sure, being a hard worker, right? So we talk back to the work ethic, and as a largely immigrant community, by default, we're hard workers. And so being a hard worker is the baseline. And so that's a superpower, right? Like, I know that I need to work really hard. Another quality of being Latina is that, we always help those around us. And, I learned that from my mother. My mother would host educational workshops in our living room for the neighbors in the building who were pregnant, just because.
Your mom sounds amazing.
Yes, mom sounds amazing. Yeah, exactly.
For no reason other than all these women are pregnant. Let me find someone who can talk to them. And so
Anna, come.
The things that happened in my house, we had all kinds of crazy talks that happened in my living room. But, I saw that growing up, and I knew that you have to help leave this world a better place. And so you have to help those around you. It's not just about, and certainly you do that seeing patients, right? Like every patient that I see, hopefully I'm trying to help.
So it's a word that you're describing is caring.
Caring and wanting to help those around me. And so I think that that's another superpower. And then really loving my background. I love being Latina. I love being Dominican. I love going to the Dominican Republic. I love our food. I love our music. I love our commitment to family. And how amazing is that, to have that. And so I'm so grateful that that is part of my background. I feel sad sometimes that I feel like I haven't given that as much to my children just because they're so busy with sports and school and all of that. But that is for sure a superpower that has really helped ground me, in times of difficulty. It provides me joy. And so that is another superpower, to have this whole other culture that is my home and my background.
But just to stay on the children, and because we're volleyball mothers, our kids play volleyball together. So that's how I got to know Anna, because obviously my daughter going every weekend to different places for the last couple of years and meeting with them, the Latina moms with the Latino kids are are more not only, but are more, you just find that entry point, which is already you get to level 1 just by being.
Yeah.
Right? You're Latina, perfect, let's go. Now we can be friendlier than when you get to know each other. And I can say that is something that I feel in both our kids. I think that both, I would say, Sophia and Tamara feel Latinas, do not have to hide. And I would say like would take it up even more.
Yeah.
And we will see how they do in college. But I think that even if you're not pushing it, it is ingrained.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you're pushing down.
Yeah, no, for sure.
In assimilation or else.
Yes, although my mother would come and bring me articles all the time about how important it is to be bilingual because she didn't think I was teaching my kids Spanish well enough. And I'm like, I know that it's important. It's just really hard. So like, yes, I'm still hopeful that like they will become fully bilingual at some point. But yeah, it's one of those things.
How old are they?
16 and 18. They speak enough.
Yes.
I think you just have to throw them in a Latin American country for a while on their own and they'll be fine.
Okay.
Buy them
have
a couple of Bad Bunny
5 and a
records.
3-year-old, so I'm like asking for advice. How does it feel? I imagine you're the only woman that looks like you in the leadership rooms at Columbia. Is that like, are you the only Latina woman?
So no. So we have come together, right? So that I want to talk about the Latino Association that we started recently. There aren't that many Latinas in my department, but there's Latinas in the pediatrics department or in the internal medicine department. And so like we've come together because of this association, working towards these goals, increasing their numbers, increasing community, helping to mentor and grow the pipeline. And so it's been great because we're like, oh, I didn't know that there were these many other Latinos in other places. And so it's been a vehicle for us to come together. So it feels less alone.
Yeah.
The same that you wanted in Fieldstone.
Yeah.
Is building those same principles of how do you get your crowd not to be alone.
Yeah.
And in the entire ecosystem that you have gone through, like, have you felt that your Latini, that was something that was pushing you down, that was like a cone to your career where you had to dial down? You talked about the pros, you talked about the superpower, but certainly we want to also address how it's really also potentially
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to measure that, but I do think that because leaders are typically, white men, right? Like that's usually who the leaders are. You don't automatically think of someone like myself as a leader or someone who can be powerful. And
why not?
Because implicit bias, like we're all human, we all have stereotypes, we all have biases. You have to be intentional to get around that. You have to like stop yourself and be like, wait, no, that doesn't make sense. And most people don't do that. Most people just go with, their implicit bias. Good people, well-meaning people, but a Latina is not the first person that you automatically think of for, helping to solve a problem or pushing something forward, because that's traditionally not who's in those spaces. I've been fortunate that, I do have sponsors, the chair of my department, the dean of our medical school, different leaders have made it a point to try to promote, develop women of color. And so, I think that's been talking about being like in the right place at the right time. Like that's been helpful. But, I think that you have to be intentional about it, and not everyone's intentional.
So you don't feel like you've ever had to try not to look or sound Latina in your career?
I do think that you don't bring your whole self to work. I do now, but I didn't for a long time. It just was so different that there was no reason to bring my whole self. And, going back to like, finally, it's helpful to be a Latina with my background. Like that wasn't something that was useful to me in a work space. And so yeah, I do think that we sometimes don't bring our whole selves to work, and that's awful because we want to bring our whole selves to work, because that's why diversity is so great, because you see different perspectives, different approaches to things. And, I think that as diversity increases, people will feel more comfortable bringing their whole selves to the table.
Well, I'm wondering, like, what did it look like when you were trying to not be so Latina? Like, were you speaking differently? Were you just not talking about your background? Like, what does it look like? Anna trying to hide her Latinidad in the work, in like the hospital.
I mean, I think, there's things like code switching with, like talking differently with your friends than you do in your workspace. I did work really hard. I did have a Spanish accent initially, and I worked really hard to not have a Spanish accent. But, not sharing my story, like, talking about these things that I'm talking about now, like, there would be no reason to bring that up. And like now it's like, wait, no, these stories are amazing. Like I need to share them and they're so powerful, not just because it's, like an interesting story, but it can help others. Like you were saying, like it can inspire others. And there's a lot of value to sharing these stories that I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to share before.
Thank you.
So what would be the message that you would give to a young Latina that is thinking like, I really would love to be a doctor, but I don't know?
Yeah, I think that it's important. So if someone's young and thinking about being a doctor, they need to get out there and talk to different people, understand the path, understand what it takes, because there's a lot of unspoken things that people don't necessarily have access to that knowledge. And so like, what are the things that you need to be doing to make yourself a more attractive applicant? What types of grades do you need to have? When do you start studying for these standardized tests? There are a lot of people who are willing to help, but you need to connect. And so just getting out there and networking and finding resources, not being afraid to ask for help. I think that that's also something that we sometimes, like we're worried like, oh, I already feel like I don't belong here. And if I ask a question, people are going to really know that I don't belong here. But like, no, everyone's asking questions. You're not expected to know everything. And so it is totally fine to ask questions and you should ask questions. So that's my other big message, like if you're in school, like make sure you go to all the office hours, make sure that you're asking all the questions, just make sure that you're getting as much information as you can.
And making yourself more attractive by doing what kind of things?
Yeah, and so, there's like a very clear path, not very clear, but there are clear paths to get into medical school, for example, right? So you need to have,
Straight A's.
A certain GPA. You need to do well on the standardized tests. And so that's one thing. But then, do you want to do some research? Do you want to do some community service? Do you want to shadow doctors? Like there are all these things that you should be doing along the way in order to make yourself a good applicant. And you can't just like figure that out at the end. Like you should be doing that all along. And so getting some mentorship around that.
Great. Well, look, we have a methodology called Flip the Script, where we take one of the cultural nuances that are very much like the superpowers that you mentioned for Latinas and else, that are not yet understood in a corporate environment, that are not yet understood as a positive asset for Latinos. For example, having an accent is really what it means is that you're bilingual, that you speak several languages, being social, that you're super committed. Is there anything in your field that you feel could be flipped the script, either that we change it around in our mindset or also change the enabling environment so that we could be seen as a positive?
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things that we talked about, just like, what it means to be a leader and like, sometimes we're not seen as like the cutthroat, like alpha, get to the top, because we're seen as someone who like maybe wants to
be nice,
be in a group, not be disruptive. But that's something that we should flip the script on, because I think as a leader, we certainly want to be able to help those around us. Like the best leaders are the ones who help those around them. And so for sure, that one.
Leading as a mother, bringing everybody along doesn't mean that that's not a leadership style.
Correct.
And should be flipped. And as Cepin, it was incredible having you with us. Thank you so very much for your wisdom.
Thank you. This was great. We learned a lot from a different field, and I really hope that we can get more Latinas in the medical field and more Latinas in leadership positions so you guys can change the system, because what needs some adjustment is clearly the system.
Yes.
And thanks to you, your advice, your wisdom, and the conversation, we're going to be able to lead a la Latina.